What's up, football fans? Welcome back to Sports Crunch with DKROM. I'm your host, David Cromwell, a.k.a. DKROM, and this is our second edition, and this is only in 3 days. We have our second edition of our fantasy football fix here on Sports Crunch with DKROM, and we have a very special guest today, and it is Mr. Jim Saranteas, the creator of the fantasy football website, thefantasygreek.com, and last year, his draft guide was the best-selling fantasy football draft guide on Amazon.com, and he is one of the best fantasy football sources out there. And it's a pleasure to welcome Jim to the show. How you doing, Jim?
Hey, Dave. Thanks for having me. How's it going, buddy?
Going great, thanks. It's always a pleasure to have you to talk football with you, Jim. It's a pleasure. And before we get into like the strategies and debates of who to draft and stuff like that, there's some breaking news that just came in. Ian Rappaport of NFL Network reported that the Carolina Panthers' worst fears have come true. Kelvin Benjamin did indeed tear his ACL this morning in practice, so that is a top 15 to 20 wide receiver off your fantasy boards permanently this season. And my question for you is, how does this impact a couple other Panthers? Obviously, Greg Olsen is easily, in my opinion, a top 5 fantasy tight end. The first part of this two-part question is, would you move Greg Olsen up a little bit your draft board because of this Kelvin Benjamin injury?
Yes. I mean, you're right. He's top 5. I probably have him at number 4, right behind Travis Kelce. I think if you took Greg Olsen before Travis Kelce, there would be nobody out there that would blame you for that. But certainly it does help him. And, he should be a stud in both standard and especially in PPR leagues.
Most definitely. And another thing, not to forget, the Panthers traded up in the second round of the 2015 draft to take a player with strikingly similar physical attributes to Kelvin Benjamin in Devin Funchess. Like Benjamin, they're asking, is he a wide receiver? Is he a tight end? He played tight end last year, but the Panthers drafted him to be a receiver. And now it looks like Devin Funchess is going to top the pecking order amongst the Carolina Panthers wide receiver core this season. And the question is, where would you currently slot Devin Funchess? At what round at the earliest would you consider taking Devin Funchess right now?
I would first start off by valuing him at best as a wide receiver 5, wide receiver 4. It's sort of like Kelvin Benjamin last year, actually. I took a chance on him in a couple of leagues, and it obviously benefited me. And I actually had him lined up to be a keeper in both the leagues I took him in, and now that's out the window. But I would like Kevin Funchess sort of, 10th, 11th round. You might even be able to get him a little bit later for all we know, and have him as a guy to put on your bench and sort of follow him. I think what will be important is in these next few weeks to see what reports are coming out of Panthers camp. That's really going to be the critical part of this.
Yes, indeed. And to add a report, Funchess did leave practice as well today with a knee tweak. And but Ron Rivera said that he is only expected to miss a day or two of practice. So, but as long as he's healthy and ready to go and shows enough in the final 2 or 3 weeks of preseason, that Devin Funchess should definitely be on all your fantasy radars as an attractive late round draft prospect. And moving on to the other news today. LaShawn McCoy, as was reported by Adam Schefter this morning, after suffering a hamstring injury in practice yesterday, it wasn't as serious as initially feared, and he is expected to go by week 1. However, a lot of fantasy experts, fantasy analysts on Twitter have been saying that they would still drop McCoy down their draft boards pretty much. Would you keep McCoy where he's at, or would you drop him on your draft board?
Well, for me, McCoy's a mid to late first-round draft pick, and at this point, I'm just going to leave him exactly where he is. It's not the first time a running back has tweaked a hamstring, has tweaked anything, and I wouldn't panic just yet. This is a guy that is earmarked to touch the football close to 400 times this season, and to me, that keeps his value really high.
Yeah, volume is a big part of the equation that everybody must keep in mind when they're drafting, and that is why McCoy is why a lot of people are high on McCoy, despite the Bills having arguably the worst quarterback situation in the National Football League this season. And another piece of news that fantasy owners are should be paying attention to. But no final decision or no settlement yet. Probably won't know until September the 4th at the latest. But today, based on the reports I heard from Adam Schefter, Ben Volen of the Boston Globe et al., that it wasn't a good day for the National Football League and Roger Goodell's side of the argument at the settlement conference with Judge Richard Berman in New York. And based on what they said, it would personally shock me if Tom Brady's suspension isn't at least partially, or if not completely, thrown out the window, especially because of some legal cases that have said that the NFL's arbitration process is illegal under federal law, like a Missouri Supreme Court. I don't want to get into too many legalese, but basically, the law is on Tom Brady's side, as the judge indicated today by grilling the National Football League. And if Tom Brady gets all of his suspension overturned, or gets 2 to 3 games of it overturned, would you think he's a top 5 fantasy quarterback? And whether or not he's top 5 or not, what round would you consider taking Tom Brady should most of that suspension be thrown out?
You know, even without the suspension, I have Tom Brady as more towards the bottom of the top 10. He's basically one of the last few quarterbacks I would take off any fantasy draft boards, not just because of the uncertainty as to his future into the season, but as well as just his production in general. He's not the same Tom Brady from 3-4 seasons ago, and I think everybody has to admit that. This isn't the same offense that the Patriots ran 2 or 3 years ago. Everybody has to admit that. Tom Brady, for me, is better suited as a quarterback that you can platoon with another quarterback if you take your quarterback last. Or I'm sorry, if you're one of the last teams to take a quarterback, he's the guy that you'll platoon with somebody else and you'll work the matchups. But I don't see this affecting him at all, and he's certainly not a top 5 fantasy quarterback anymore.
There is some logic to that, especially since he is turning 38 years old, and we saw what happened to Peyton Manning last year. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. And now let's move on to draft strategies. And one of the most commonly preached fantasy draft strategies out there that I personally follow religiously is waiting on a quarterback. My question is, how long are you personally, Jim, willing to wait to draft your quarterback?
You know, I do not. I'm not a person that says I won't draft a quarterback, let's say in the 2nd or 3rd round. For me, it depends. For example, if you're in a scoring system that gives TDs 6 points for the quarterback, I would say it's just fine to grab a quarterback in the 1st round like Andrew Luck or Aaron Rodgers. But most leagues are not that way. With most leagues generally awarding 4 points per TD, you shouldn't be getting a quarterback in the 1st round. You should be focusing on your running back position in the top half of that round, wide receiver position in the back half of that round, and looking for a quarterback probably late to 2nd round, early 3rd round. I generally, when I mock draft, I focus in on the other position players first, and don't take a quarterback till the 5th, 6th, 7th round. For example, today I did a 12-team mock, and I got Tony Romo in the 7th round, and I was god-awful happy because I paired him with Jamal Charles, Melvin Gordon, T.Y. Hilton, a couple other players, and you just walk away saying this is a good, solid team. And Tony Romo, quite frankly, is a player that more than likely he'll be turning the clock back a couple of seasons to 2 seasons ago when he posted roughly 4,800 yards, and I think 30-plus TDs is a certainty for him, given all the issues that they're expected to have at the running back position.
Most definitely, and that personally is my favorite strategy. If like you get a Jamal Charles or Melvin Gordon, T.Y. Hilton, and solid backs receivers in rounds 1 through 6, and get Tony Romo or Eli Manning later, I'd say you're doing a very good job. They did a great job there, I say. continuing our talk about draft strategies, I was wondering if you were familiar with the following draft strategies. The zero running back strategy, in which I forgot who came up with it, but it's basically, it says don't draft a running back until the late rounds, and it's a PPR only recommended method, let me add. Also, the race to fill the flex method, which is basically not differentiating between running backs and wide receivers, and just taking the best one of those two positions on your board, depending on the player. And also a strategy that's coming along in standard leagues is the zero wide receiver strategy, in which you start off with 4 or 5 running backs in a row and wait till like rounds 5 or 6 for your first receiver. Are you a fan of any of those strategies? And if so, which one would you take a chance on?
Well, I suppose I can't say I'm a fan of a specific strategy, but I have some general understanding as to the first two that you've mentioned. Basically, the zero look. If you can't get a running back in the top half of the first round, you are probably better off going for a top wide receiver, because what happens is in a snake draft, it just turns around and snakes back, and you can get another top running back in the second round. So it's not rocket science. I mean, that's the way you should be approaching your drafts. And in fact, I tell people, if you actually have a draft table in front of you that you're systematically filling out, you'll start being able to anticipate the 3-4 players you'll be able to draft with your next pick as the draft snakes, and that makes complete sense. In terms of the second approach, can you refresh my memory on that?
It's the race to fill the flex, in which you basically don't differentiate between running backs and wide receivers.
Yeah, I do that already, and I recommend that already. That if you treat your players equally, you won't have to subscribe to the old approach of drafting 2 running backs with your first top 2 picks. You'll be, especially with tight ends and wide receivers, if you treat them all the same, then you see Jimmy Graham's a second or third round pick. Rob Gronkowski's a second or third round pick, with Jimmy Graham going in the 3rd or 4th round, and then suddenly the rest of the tight ends, they really don't make any sense until the 5th, 6th, 7th round. If you follow your strategy that way, you should be able to optimize your roster and walk out every single time you draft with a top-notch quality team that will be competing for a championship.
I completely agree, Jim. And you mentioned Rob Gronkowski, which takes me to my next question. I personally would have like 5 running backs, if not 6 or 7 running backs, that I would probably take ahead of Gronk. But let's say if you're picking 8th, 9th, or 10th, at least in my view, in round 1, I'd say you're better off taking Gronk because of the scarcity of the tight end position this year, and taking your running back in round 2 or something like that. So my question is for you: how many running backs would you take ahead of Gronk? Is your question?
I would probably, there's probably a good 6, 7, 8. I've seen people taking Gronk at the end of the first round into the second round, and I think he's a second round guy, and that's just based on sheer numbers. Because if you take him and you realize that he is sort of a top 15 receiver when bunched with the other wide receivers, I mean, that's where he should fall. He squarely belongs in the second round. If you want to grab him early, that's fine, but it's not going to hurt you if you don't, because you'll easily be able to get 2 receivers to sort of make up the production that you're going to miss on, if not including a running back.
That's a very interesting side of that debate, Jim. I've heard debates for taking Gronk in the first round, and your side against it, and I don't see honestly any flaws in either argument, and that's why you just got to trust your gut when you draft. And now let's play a game called Would You Rather. This is my favorite part of the show, in which I give you two names, and you tell me which player you prefer to draft out of those 2 and why. The first Would You Rather is a personal debate I am having, where I am picking in at least 2 of my leagues: C.J. Anderson or Jeremy Hill.
Oh, C.J. Anderson, I would take first. Just like the opportunity that he has in front of him in that Gary Kubiak offense. I think Jeremy Hill is a little bit more limited. Even if he gets the 20 carries per game that people are talking about, I still like C.J. Anderson because of the tremendous upside that he has, which is to put up 1,500 all-purpose yards and double-digit TDs.
I completely agree. And also, out of all the backs on the Broncos roster, he has that ideal skill set for a Gary Kubiak back. Just stick your foot in the ground and hit that hole. He does it better than both Ronnie Hillman and Monty Ball. As a Broncos fan, I can tell you that for a fact. So, and the number, and it's another running back controversy, and this is where like round 3 or 4 comes along, at least in 10-team leagues. Justin Forsett or Lamar Miller?
I'm still a fan of Justin Forsett, if only because of this new offense that Mark Trestman is bringing along. He's a guy that could come up with 60 receptions and put up the 1,500 all-purpose yards that I just mentioned. Where Lamar Miller, he has yet to sort of embrace the running back position. He's shown flashes, but he hasn't really. He hasn't come out and taken commanding control of it. I think last year everybody was really high on him and he disappointed. And I'm not willing to put to stake my fantasy team on him if my choice is between him and Justin Forsett.
Yeah, Forsett did have the better year, but Lamar Miller, to my recollection, was actually the 9th highest scoring running back in certain formats. So he's not. So I will slightly disagree there, but I definitely love Forsett's upside, and especially since Trestman is keeping some of the Gary Kubiak system in place because in Baltimore, so Forsett can continue to thrive with that skill set. And if you have the receptions, and he's a very good receiver out of the backfield too, he could have an even better year this season than he did last season. So I'm with you there on Forsett. So there. And the next, would you rather, Amari Cooper or Mike Wallace?
That's a tough call. It's a really tough call. I'll probably stick with Amari Cooper. I really like the rookie this year in that Raiders offense. He's poised. Reports are positive. He's a complete wide receiver. And I like him. He's a guy that should make a big splash here in the NFL. Mike Wallace is sort of a close second for me. There's a lot more question marks just going into this new offense. He certainly should be able to stretch the field, but his dependability has been in question in the past. So for that reason, I'll stick with Amari Cooper, but I think it's a really close call.
It sure is. Wallace has a major upgrade at a quarterback, especially deep ball accuracy, going from Ryan Tannehill to Teddy Bridgewater. Boy, Bridgewater throws the deep ball a lot better, and Wallace should be able to catch a lot more of those in Minnesota than he did in Miami. Yeah, but I agree about Cooper. I've always loved Cooper in college, and he personally reminded me and many people of a young Marvin Harrison who should be going to the Hall of Fame this year. Is that what you saw with Amari?
Yeah, I mean he's one of those young wide receivers we saw last year. He should be able to step in and immediately make a big time impact.
Absolutely, especially because of his route running. Indeed, and because the Raiders are going to be playing from behind a lot, most likely, and he'll probably be the focal point of that offense with Derek Carr. And now our next, would you rather, T.J. Yeldon or Joseph Randle?
Or Joseph Randle. I got to tell you, I'm all aboard on T.J. Yeldon. Again, it's a situation where he's coming in and he's going to be the breadwinner on that team. And Joseph Randle, I'm not sold on it yet. I guess he is. People are saying that he's projected to get 20 touches, but whatever the case is, it's going to be a committee. And for all we know, Darren McFadden could end up having one of his better seasons, if only because he's going to be behind the best offensive line he's ever played behind ever. And I'd rather have the workhorse running back, especially a guy like TJ Yeldon, as my flex than I would Joseph Randle.
Yeah. There is a case for Yeldon and there is a case for Randle. I agree with you about the case for Yeldon, by the way, but the case for Randle is this. Randle is on a much better offense. and Yeldon is on a potentially low-scoring offense with Jacksonville, so his touchdown scoring upside could be limited. And obviously, as I'm sure you know as well as I do, that touchdowns are the greatest equalizer in weekly fantasy matchups. But the point is, in a general picture, would you rather have a running back who's going to get most of the carries on a bad offense versus a running back on a good offense who has more upside but might not get a lot of the carries?
Well, that's sort of a loaded question. For example, I remember drafting Jamal Lewis several seasons ago when he was with the Browns, and everybody poo-hooed Jamal Lewis because, oh, he's on the Browns, and the Browns are terrible. They don't have this great offense. He ended up being one of the top 10 running backs in the league. So to answer your question, I want the running back that's going to get me the volume, because here's the thing. Every team is going to score a certain amount of touchdowns every year. And the question is whether they're going to be able to go beyond their running backs. Their running backs are going to score, generally speaking. So I would rather have a guy like TJ Yeldon that's set up for 1,200 to 1,400 yards and 6 to 8 TDs compared to Joseph Randle, where I'm just not sure what he's going to do. And it's a close call, but if you're looking at the flex, I got to tell you, after TJ Yeldon, there's nobody else. After Joseph Randle, you still got Darren McFadden, and you still have Philip Tanner. So I would still stick with TJ Yeldon.
Very good point. And the next one, 2 rookie wide receivers currently nursing injuries. What would be the better late-round bargain you'd invest in? Would it be Brashad Perriman of the Baltimore Ravens or Devontae Parker of the Dolphins?
Brashard Perriman, simply for this reason. There's not that many receiving weapons on the Ravens. You got Steve Smith, who put up over 1,000 yards last year. He's already announced it's his last year. The Ravens have already indicated that they would rather not overplay him. So I like Perriman. Obviously, you have to monitor his injury situation. For Devontae Parker, while I absolutely do love and adore him, they are replete with talent in the receiving game. Jarvis Landry, Greg Jennings, Jordan Cameron. You bring up Lamar Miller, fine. So Devontae Parker as a first-year wide receiver, I don't see his impact being as big as what Brashard Perriman's can be. But if Perriman is still hurt come the beginning of the season, then obviously you're going to take Parker first.
I agree about the Perriman situation indeed, but Parker could be a sneaky good bet as well because they have high hopes for him with the Dolphins. And the final part of our Would You Rather game is 2 receivers who were used to be top-tier fantasy receivers like 5, 6, 7 years ago, but now could be sneaky, amazing late-round value picks. Larry Fitzgerald or Anquan Boldin?
Larry Fitzgerald, if only because Michael Floyd's he's already hurt, and the fact that Carson Palmer's coming back should help Fitzgerald particularly. With Anquan Boldin, he's gonna have to battle with Torrey Smith a little bit, not a ton, but a little bit. And I think that whole offense for the 49ers is sort of up in the air and creates a little bit of uncertainty for me. So I would rather have Larry Fitzgerald.
I definitely heard a lot of great cases for Larry Fitzgerald in that situation, but the Cardinals are also high on second-year wide receiver John Brown, who had a pretty solid rookie year last year himself as that deep threat. Why aren't you scared of John Brown cutting into Fitzgerald's targets?
Well, I mean, John Brown is basically going to take over Michael Floyd's lack of production, and he'll cut into Michael Floyd's production. I don't see it with Fitzgerald because he and Carson Palmer have already shown chemistry together.
Makes a lot of sense. And we have, for our final part of our discussion today, I want you to tell me who are some players who you think are overvalued and you almost consider avoiding, and some players who are undervalued which are guys to keep an eye on once you get into like the second half of your drafts.
Sure. In terms of quarterback, your undervalued players right now are Eli Manning and Phillip Rivers. Eli Manning, he's surrounded by just an array of offensive weapons, and it's almost what's the word? It's insulting that he has been ranked so low and so underdrafted. If only because last year I think he put up 4,400 yards, one of his best seasons as a pro, and that was after Odell Beckham Jr. missed the first 4 games of the season. Plus, he gets Victor Cruz back. Phillip Rivers is another guy. Everyone's poo-hooing him because of his finish last season, and they're poo-hooing him because, quite frankly, he threw the hell out of the ball, and I think he just started to break down. Well, this year, they're going to have a running game. It's going to be a decent running game, and he should more like he did a couple of seasons ago than last year. He is the most consistent. Hold on, Dave, for 1 second.
No problem.
Sorry, I was about to lose you.
That's okay. No problem.
So Phillip Rivers has been one of the most consistent quarterbacks in football with over 4,000 yards passing and over 30 plus TDs per season the last several seasons. So I think the fact that Phillip Rivers is sort of going as a QB2 is really funny, but he's going to be one of those guys you can platoon with another quarterback if you pass on getting a quarterback early in drafts. In terms of running backs, Chris Ivory's a good bet. Like I mentioned, LaShawn McCoy already. A player that I think is overvalued is Jonathan Stewart. He's still going like late in the 4th round. And here's a guy with a very bad injury history. And all indications to me are if I had a choice between him and Cameron Artis-Payne for the Panthers, I would take Cameron Artis-Payne, and you could get him late in drafts and probably expect him to end up being a flex player for you down the stretch. And a guy that I think is underdrafted too is Reggie Bush. The 49ers brought him in to be more like the Reggie Bush from 2 seasons ago that we saw with the Lions. And if Bush can reclaim that sort of playmaking ability, I mean, he'll be very valuable for you in fantasy drafts. And what's great is he's going late in the 10th and into the 11th round, so you don't have to spend too much on him. Overvalued players, I already mentioned Joseph Randle. He's going way too high in mock drafts, I think in the 4th round. And another guy that I'm nervous about is Todd Gurley. Especially in standard leagues where they're not keepers. I mean, he's going in the 4th, 5th round, and indications are he's going to miss half the season. And if you plan on being without him for half the season, Trey Mason's will potentially make a case to stay on as the starter even when Gurley comes back midway in the season. So you need to monitor that situation closely. In terms of wide receivers, I already mentioned Larry Fitzgerald as being undervalued. Overvalued is Martavius Bryant, only because I like Martavius Bryant, but he's still stuck as the 3rd wide receiver in that offense, which sort of makes him as a low-end wide receiver 3, high-end wide receiver 4, and he's still being drafted in the 4th or 5th round. That's just too high if that's the way the Steelers are going to treat him this season. Another guy I don't like is Jeremy Maclin. I'm just not a believer in Alex Smith, and I really blame Alex Smith for all the problems that the wide receivers had last year with the Chiefs, because there's just no other person that you can really blame. And then for tight ends, Julius Thomas, he's still being drafted way too high for my liking, as I think Jordan Cameron a little bit. When's the last time Jordan Cameron did anything for anybody? It was for the first half of one season, 2 or 3 seasons ago. Otherwise, he hasn't been very consistent. I certainly like his upside, but he should be a guy that should be taken towards the end of all tight ends. And an undervalued tight end for me is Kyle Rudolph of the Vikings. He's back finally. He looks healthy. And in these first 2 preseason games for the Vikings, the reality is that Teddy Bridgewater has been taking what the defenses are giving to him. He's more than happy to throw it to Kyle Rudolph. So I see Kyle Rudolph making an impact in that offense, and he's a guy that you could get with a late-round pick as your TE2, and you'll probably be playing him through the season.
Very good advice, very good in-depth analysis as always, Jim. And that does it for today's edition of Sports Crunch with DKROM, the 2nd installment of our Fantasy Football Fix series. We hope to be doing a lot more in the future, so keep a lookout for it. And before we go, I want Jim, first of all, thank you so much for joining us and donating your amazing mind to our program, Jim. And before we go, I want to give you the opportunity to let our listeners know where to find you on the internet and on the airwaves.
Absolutely. You can find us at thefantasygreek.com, your second opinion for your fantasy football instinct. We've got a nice magazine layout to our site, often publishing articles from top 10s to Different approaches to drafting, whether you should be drafting 2 running backs with your first 2 picks or taking a quarterback first, how that will impact your roster. The bigger news right now, Dave, is you need to buy our fantasy draft guide, which you mentioned right here. Here, everybody, see it? Which is available on Amazon.com. We're the #1 new release right now. And you go to Amazon.com, in the search engine type the Fantasy Greek Draft Guide. You'll get yourself a draft guide. And what's great is, compared to everyone else, where your guides go stale, their rankings because of injuries, like the one to Calvin Benjamin, on our site, by buying the draft guide, you get a free Skybox membership, which gives you access to the private part of our site where all our rankings and information is updated just for you, those who purchase the draft guide. Thanks again, Dave.
Thank you again, Jim. You're very welcome. And thanks to all of you for tuning in today. And that does it for today's edition of Sports Crunch with DKROM. But keep an eye out, because we will be back on the air very soon to talk more football, more stuff from around the NFL league, and, of course, fantasy football and how to dominate your league in 2015. For Jim Saranteas, I'm David Cromwell. Take care, everybody.